On Care to be Had for the Dead by Augustine of Hippo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Long time, my venerable fellow Bishop Paulinus, have I been thy holiness's debtor for an answer ever since thou wrotest to me by them of the household of our most religious daughter Flora, asking of me whether it profit any man after death that his body is buried at the memorial of some saint. This, namely, had the said widow begged of thee for her son deceased in those parts, and thou hadst written her an answer consoling her and announcing to her concerning the body of the faithful young man Cynegius, that the thing which she with motherly and pious affection desired was done, to wit, by placing it in the basilica of most blessed Felix the Confessor. Upon which occasion it came to pass that, by the same bearers of thy letter, thou didst write also to me, raising the like question, and craving that I would answer what I thought of this matter, at the same time not forbearing to say what are thine own sentiments. For thou sayest that, to thy thinking, these be no empty motions of religious and faithful minds, which take this care for their deceased friends. Thou addest, moreover, that it cannot be void of effect that the whole Church is wont to supplicate for the departed, so that hence it may be further conjectured that it doth profit a person after death, if by the faith of his friends for the interment of his body such a spot be provided wherein may be apparent the aid, likewise in this way sought, of the saints. But this being the case, how to this opinion that should not be contrary which the Apostle says, for we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ, that each may receive according to the things he hath done by the body, whether good or bad. This, thou signifiest, thou dost not well see, for this apostolic sentence doth before death admonish to be done that which may profit after death, not then first, when there is to be now a receiving of that which a person shall have done before death. True, but this question is thus solved, namely, that there is a certain kind of life by which is acquired, while one lives in this body, that it should be possible for these things to be done of some help to the departed, and consequently it is according to the things done by the body, that they are aided by the things which shall, after they have left the body, be religiously done on their behalf. For there are whom these things aid nothing at all, namely, when they are done either for persons whose merits are so evil, that neither by such things are they worthy to be aided, or for such persons whose merits are so good, that of such things they have no need as aids. Of the kind of life, therefore, which each hath led by the body, doth it come, that these things profit or profit not, whatever are piously done on his behalf when he has left the body. For touching merit, whereby these things profit, if none have been gotten in this life, it is in vain sought after this life. So it comes to pass as well that not unmeaningly doth the Church, or care of friends, bestow upon the departed whatever of religion it shall be able, as also that nevertheless each receiveth according to the things which he hath done by the body, whether it be good or bad, the Lord rendering unto each according to his works. For that this, which is bestowed, should be capable of profiting him after the body, this was acquired in that life which he hath led in the body. Possibly thy inquiry is satisfied by this my brief reply, but what other considerations move me, to which I think meet to answer, do thou for a short space attend. In the books of the Maccabees we read of sacrifice offered for the dead, howbeit even if it were nowhere at all read in the old Scriptures, not small is the authority which in this usage is clear of the whole Church, namely that in the prayers of the priest which are offered to the Lord God at his altar, the commendation of the dead hath also its place. But then, whether there be some profit accruing unto the soul of the dead from the place of its body, requires a more careful inquiry. And first, whether it make any difference in causing or increasing of misery after this life to the spirits of men, if their bodies be not buried, this must be looked into, not in the light of opinion, however commonly received, but rather of the holy writ of our religion. For we are not to credit that, as is read in Maro, the unburied are prohibited from navigating and crossing the infernal stream, because, forsooth, to none is given to pass the hideous banks, and waters hoarse, ere, in their meet abode, the bones have sunk to rest. Who can incline a Christian heart to these poetical and fabulous figments, when the Lord Jesus, to the intent that under the hands of their enemies, who should have their bodies in their power, Christians might lie down without a fear, asserts that not a hair of their head shall perish, exhorting that they should not fear them, which, when they have killed the body, have nothing more that they can do. Of which, in the first book, On the City of God, I have methinks enough spoken to break the teeth in their mouths, who, in imputing to Christian times the barbarous devastation, especially that which Rome has lately suffered, do cast up to us this also, that Christ did not there come to the succour of his own, to whom, when it is answered that the souls of the faithful were, according to the merits of their faith, by him taken into protection, they insult over us with talking of their corpses left unburied. All this matter, then, concerning burial, I have in such words as these expounded. But, say I, in such a slaughter heap of dead bodies, could they not even be buried? Not this either doth pious faith too greatly dread, holding that which is foretold, that not even consuming beasts will be an hindrance to the rising again of bodies, of which not a hair of the head shall perish. Nor in any wise would truth say, Fear not them which kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, if it could at all hinder the life to come, whatever enemies might choose to do with the bodies of the slain. Unless haply any is so absurd as to contend that they ought not to be feared before death, lest they kill the body, but ought to be feared after death, lest, having killed the body, they suffer it not to be buried. Is that then false which Christ says, who kill the body and afterwards have no more that they can do, if they have so great things that they can do on dead bodies? Far be the thought that that should be false which truth hath said. For the thing said is, that they do somewhat when they kill, because in the body there is feeling while it is in killing, but afterward they have nothing more that they can do, because there is no feeling in the body when killed. Many bodies then of Christians the earth hath not covered, but none of them hath any separated from heaven and earth, the whole of which he filleth with presence of himself, who knoweth whence to resuscitate that which he created. It is said indeed in the psalm, The dead bodies of thy servants have they given for meat unto the fowls of the heaven, the flesh of thy saints unto the beasts of the earth. They have shed their blood like water round about Jerusalem, and there was no man to bury them. But more to heighten the cruelty of them who did these things, not to the infelicity of them who suffered them. For, however, in sight of men these things may seem hard and dire, yet precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. So then, all these things, care of funeral, bestowal in sepulchre, pomp of obsequies, are more for comfort of the living than for help to the dead. If it at all profit the ungodly to have costly sepulture, it shall harm the godly to have vile sepulture, or none. Right handsome obsequies in sight of men did that rich man, who was clad in purple, receive of the crowd of his housefolk, but far more handsome did that poor man, who was full of sores, obtain of the ministry of angels, who bore him not out into a marble tomb, but into Abraham's bosom bore him on high. All this they laugh at, against whom we have undertaken to defend the city of God, but for all that their own philosophers even held care of sepulture in contempt, and often whole armies, while dying for their earthly country, cared not where they should after lie, or to what beasts they should become meat, and the poets had leave to say of this matter with applause, Though all unearned he lie, his covering is the overarching sky. How much less ought they to make a vaunting about unburied bodies of Christians, to whom the flesh itself with all its members, refashioned, not only from the earth, but even from the other elements, yea, from their most secret windings, whereinto these evanished corpses have retired, is assured to be in an instant of time rendered back, and made entire as at the first, according to his promise. Yet it follows not that the bodies of the departed are to be despised and flung aside, and above all of just and faithful men, which bodies as organs and vessels to all good works their spirit hath holily used. For if a father's garment and ring, and whatever such like is the more dear to those whom they leave behind, the greater their affection is towards their parents, in no wise are the bodies themselves to be spurned, which truly we wear in more familiar and close conjunction than any of our putting on. For these pertain not to ornament or aid which is applied from without, but to the very nature of man. Whence also the funerals of the just men of old were with dutiful piety cared for, and their obsequies celebrated, and sepulture provided, and themselves, while living, did, touching burial or even translation of their bodies, give charge to their sons. Tobias also, to have by burying of the dead obtained favour with God, is by witness of an angel commended. The Lord himself also, about to rise on the third day, both preaches and commends to be preached the good work of a religious woman, that she poured out a precious ointment over his limbs, and did it for his burial. And they are with praise commemorated in the Gospel, who, having received his body from the cross, did carefully and with reverend honour see it wound and laid in the sepulchre. These authorities, however, do not put us upon thinking that there is in dead bodies any feeling, but rather that the providence of God, who is moreover pleased with such offices of piety, doth charge itself with the bodies also of the dead. This they betoken to the intent our faith of resurrection might be stayed up thereby, where also is wholesomely learned how great may be the reward for alms, which we do unto the living and feeling, if not even that be lost before God, whatever of duty and of diligence is paid to the lifeless members of men. There are indeed also other things which, in speaking of the bestowal or removal of their bodies, the holy patriarchs willed to be understood as spoken by the prophetic spirit, but this is not the place to treat thoroughly of these things, seeing that sufficeth which we have said. But if the lack of those things which are necessary for sustentation of the living, as food and clothing, however heavy affliction attend the lacking, do not break in good men the manly courage of bearing and enduring, nor eradicate piety from the mind, but by exercising make it more fruitful, how much more doth lack of those things which are wont to be applied for care of funerals and bestowal of bodies of the departed, not make them wretched, now that in the hidden abodes of the pious they are at rest. And therefore, when these things have to dead bodies of Christians in that devastation of the great city or of other towns also been lacking, there is neither fault of the living, who could not afford these things, nor pain of the dead, who could not feel the same. This is my opinion concerning the ground and reason of sepulture, which I have therefore from another book of mine transferred to this, because it was easier to rehearse this than to express the same matter in another way. If this be true, doubtless also the providing for the interment of bodies a place at the memorial of saints is a mark of a good human affection towards the remains of one's friends, since, if there be religion in the burying, there cannot but be religion in taking thought where the burying shall be. But while it is desirable there should be such like solaces of survivors, for the showing forth of their pious mind toward their beloved, I do not see what helps they be to the dead, save in this way, that upon recollection of the place in which are deposited the bodies of those whom they love, they should by prayer commend them to those same saints, who have as patrons taken them into their charge to aid them before the Lord, which indeed they would be still able to do, even though they were not able to inter them in such places. But then the only reason why the name memorials or monuments is given to those sepulchres of the dead which become specially distinguished, is that they recall to memory, and by putting in mind, cause us to think of, them who by death are withdrawn from the eyes of the living, that they may not by forgetfulness be also withdrawn from men's hearts. For both the term memorial most plainly shows this, and monument is so named from monishing, that is, putting in mind. For which reason the Greeks also call that mnemion, which we call a memorial or monument, because in their tongue the memory itself, by which we remember, is called mneme. When therefore the mind recollects where the body of a very dear friend lies buried, and thereupon there occurs to the thoughts a place rendered venerable by the name of a martyr, to that same martyr doth it commend the soul in affection of heartfelt recollection and prayer. And when this affection is exhibited to the departed by faithful men who are most dear to them, there is no doubt that it profits them, who while living in the body merited that such things should profit them after this life. But even if some necessity should, through absence of all facility, not allow bodies to be interred, or in such places interred, yet should there be no pretermining of supplications for the spirits of the dead, which supplications that they should be made for all in Christian and Catholic fellowship departed, even without mentioning of their names, under a general commemoration, the Church hath charged herself withal, to the intent that they which lack, for these officers, parents or sons or whatever kindred or friends, may have the same afforded unto them by the one pious mother, which is common to all. But if there were lack of these supplications, which are made with right faith and piety for the dead, I account that it should not a whit profit their spirits, howsoever in holy places the lifeless bodies should be deposited. When therefore the faithful mother of a faithful son departed desired to have his body deposited in the basilica of a martyr, forasmuch as she believed that his soul would be aided by the merits of the martyr, the very believing of this was a sort of supplication, and this profited, if aught profited. and in that she recurs in her thoughts to this same sepulchre, and in her prayers more and more commends her son, the spirit of the departed is aided, not by the place of its dead body, but by that which springs from memory of the place, the living affection of the mother. For at once the thought, who is commended, and to whom, doth touch, and that with no unprofitable emotion, the religious mind of her who prays. For also in prayer to God, men do with the members of their bodies that which becometh suppliants, when they bend their knees, when they stretch forth their hands, or even prostrate themselves on the ground, and whatever else they visibly do, albeit their invisible will and heart's intention be known unto God, and he needs not these tokens that any man's mind should be opened unto him. Only hereby one more excites himself to pray, and groan more humbly and more fervently. And I know not how it is, that while these motions of the body cannot be made but by a motion of the mind proceeding, yet by the same being outwardly invisible sort made, that inward invisible one which made them is increased, and thereby the heart's affection which proceeded, that they might be made, groweth because they are made. But still, if any be in that way held or even bound, that he is not able to do these things with his limbs, it does not follow that the inner man does not pray, and before the eyes of God, in its most secret chamber, where it hath compunction, cast itself on the ground. So likewise, while it makes very much difference where a person deposits the body of his dead, while he supplicates for his spirit unto God, because both the affection preceding chose a spot which was holy, and after the body is there deposited, the recalling to mind of that holy spot renews and increases the affection which had preceded. Yet, though he may not be able in that place, which his religious mind did choose, to lay in the ground him whom he loves, in no wise ought he to cease from necessary supplications in commending of the same. For wheresoever the flesh of the departed may lie or not lie, the spirit requires rest and must get it, for the spirit in its departing from thence took with it the consciousness, without which it could make no odds how one exists, whether in a good estate or a bad, and it does not look for aiding of its life from that flesh, to which it did itself afford the life, which it withdrew in its departing, and is to render back in its returning. Since not flesh to spirit, but spirit unto flesh, procureth merit even of very resurrection, whether it be unto punishment or unto glory that is to come to life again. We read in the ecclesiastical history, which Eusebius wrote in Greek, and Rufinus turned into the Latin tongue, of martyrs' bodies in Gaul exposed to dogs, and how the leavings of those dogs and bones of the dead were, even to uttermost consumption, by fire burnt up, and the ashes of the same scattered on the river Rhone, lest anything should be left for any sort whatever of memorial, which thing must be believed to have been to no other end divinely permitted, but that Christians should learn in confessing Christ, while they despise this life, much more to despise sepulture. For this thing, which with savage rage was done to the bodies of martyrs, if it could any whit hurt them, to impair the blessed resting of their most victorious spirits, would assuredly not have been suffered to be done. In very deed, therefore, it was declared that the Lord, in saying, "Fear not them which kill the body, and afterward have no more that they can do," did not mean that he would not permit them to do anything to the bodies of his followers when dead, but that whatever they might be permitted to do, nothing should be done that could lessen the Christian felicity of the departed, nothing thereof reach to their consciousness while yet living after death, nothing avail to the detriment, no, not even of the bodies themselves, to diminish aught of their integrity when they should rise again. And yet, by reason of that affection of the human heart, whereby no man ever hateth his own flesh, if men have reason to know that after their death their bodies will lack anything which in each man's nation or country the wonted order of sepulture demandeth, it makes them sorrowful as men, and that which after death reacheth not unto them, they do before death fear for their bodies, so that we find in the books of Kings, God by one prophet threatening another prophet who had transgressed his word, that his carcass should not be brought into the sepulchre of his fathers, which the Scripture hath on this wise, "Thus saith the Lord, because thou hast been disobedient to the mouth of the Lord, and hast not kept the charge which the Lord thy God commanded thee, and hast returned and eaten bread and drunk water in the place in which he commanded thee not to eat bread, nor drink water, thy carcass shall not be brought into the sepulchre of thy fathers." Now, if in considering what account is to be made of this punishment, we go by the Gospel, where we have learnt that after the slaying of the body there is no cause to fear lest the lifeless members should suffer anything, it is not even to be called a punishment. But if we consider a man's human affection towards his own flesh, it was possible for him to be frightened or saddened while living by that of which he would have no sense when dead. And this was a punishment because the mind was pained by that thing about to happen to its body. Howsoever, when it did happen, it would feel no pain. To this intent, namely, it pleased the Lord to punish his servant, who not of his own contumacy had spurned to fulfil his command, but by deceit of another's falsehood thought himself to be obeying when he obeyed not. For it is not to be thought that he was killed by the teeth of the beast, as one whose soul should be thence snatched away to the torments of hell, seeing that over his very body the same lion which had killed it did keep watch, while moreover the beast on which he rode was left unhurt, and along with that fierce beast did with intrepid presence stand there beside his master's corpse. By which marvellous sign it appeareth that the man of God was, say rather, checked temporally even unto death, than punished after death. Of which matter the Apostle, when on account of certain offences he had mentioned the sicknesses and deaths of many, says, For if we would judge ourselves, we should not be judged of the Lord, but when we are judged, we are chastened of the Lord, that we may not be condemned with the world. That prophet truly, the very man who had beguiled him, did with much respect bury in his own tomb, and took order for his own burying beside his bones, in hope that thereby his own bones might be spared, when, according to the prophecy of that man of God, Josiah, king of Judah, did in that land disinter the bones of many dead, and with the same bones defile the sacrilegious altars which had been set up for the graven images. For he spared that tomb in which lay the prophet who more than 300 years before predicted those things, and for his sake neither was the sepulchre of him who had seduced him violated. By that affection, namely, which causes that no man ever hateth his own flesh, this man had taken forethought for his carcass, who had slain with a lie his own soul. By reason then of this, the natural love which every man hath for his own flesh, it was both to the one a punishment to learn that he should not be in the sepulchre of his fathers, and to the other a care to take order beforehand that his own bones should be spared, if he should lie beside him whose sepulchre no man should violate. This affection the martyrs of Christ, contending for the truth, did overcome, and it is no marvel that they despised that whereof they should, when death was overpast, have no feeling, when they could not by those tortures which while alive they did feel, be overcome. God was able, no doubt, even as he permitted not the lion when it had slain the prophet to touch his body further, and of a slayer made it to be a keeper. He was able, I say, to have kept the slain bodies of his own from the dogs to which they had been flung. He was able in innumerable ways to have deterred the rage of the men themselves, that to burn the carcasses, to scatter the ashes, they should not dare, but it was fit that this manifold experience also should not be lacking to manifold variety of temptations, lest the fortitude of confession, which would not, for the saving of the life of the body, give way to the savageness of persecution, should be tremblingly anxious for the honour of a sepulchre. In a word, lest faith of resurrection should dread the consuming of the body. It was fit then that even these things should be permitted, in order that, even after these examples of so great horror, the martyrs, fervent in confession of Christ, should become witnesses of this truth also, in which they had learned that they, by whom their bodies should be slain, had after that no more that they could do. Because whatever they should do to dead bodies, they would after all do nothing, seeing that in flesh devoid of all life, neither was it possible for him to feel aught who had thence departed, nor for him to lose aught thereof who created the same. But while these things were doing to the bodies of the slain, albeit the martyrs, not frightened by them, did with great fortitude suffer, yet among the brethren was there exceeding sorrow, because there was given them no means of paying the last honours to the remains of the saints, neither secretly to withdraw any part thereof, as the same history testifies, did the watching of cruel sentinels permit. So, while those which had been slain in the tearing asunder of their limbs, in the burning up of their bones, in the dispersion of their ashes, could feel no misery, yet these, who had nothing of them that they could bury, did suffer torture of exceeding grief in pitying them, because what those did in no sort feel, these in some sort did feel for them. And where was henceforth for those no more suffering, yet these did in woeful compassion suffer for them. In regard to that woeful compassion which I have mentioned, are those praised, and by King David blessed, who to the dry bones of Saul and Jonathan afforded mercy of sepulture. But yet what mercy is that which is afforded to them that have feeling of nothing? Or haply is this to be challenged back to the conceit of an infernal river, which men unburied were not able to pass over? Far be this from the faith of Christians, else hath it gone most ill with so many a multitude of martyrs, for whom there could be no burying of their bodies, and truth did cheat them when it said, Fear not them which kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do, if these have been able to do to them so great evils by which they were hindered to pass over to the places which they longed for. But because this without all doubt is most false, and it neither any whit hurts the faithful to have their bodies denied sepulture, nor any whit the giving of sepulture unto infidels advantageth them, why then are those who buried Saul and his son said to have done mercy, and for this are blessed by that godly king, but because it is a good affection with which the hearts of the pitiful are touched, when they grieve for that in the dead bodies of other men, which by that affection through which no man ever hateth his own flesh, they would not have done after their own death to their own bodies, and what they would have done by them when they shall have no more feeling, that they take care to do by others now having no feeling, while themselves have yet feeling. Stories are told of certain appearances or visions which may seem to bring into this discussion a question which should not be slighted. It is said, namely, that dead men have at times either in dreams or in some other way appeared to the living, who knew not where their bodies lay unburied, and have pointed out to them the place, and admonished that the sepulchre which was lacking should be afforded them. These things, if we shall answer to be false, we shall be thought impudently to contradict the writings of certain faithful men, and the senses of them who assure us that such things have happened to themselves. But it is to be answered that it does not follow that we are to account the dead to have sense of these things because they appear in dreams to say or indicate or ask this. For living men do also appear oftentimes to the living as they sleep, while they themselves know not that they do appear, and they are told by them what they dreamed, namely that in their dream the speakers saw them doing or saying something. Then, if it may be that a person in a dream should see me indicating to him something that has happened, or even foretelling something about to happen, while I am perfectly unwitting of the thing, and altogether regardless not only what he dreams, but whether he is awake while I am asleep, or he asleep while I am awake, or whether at one and the same time we are both awake or asleep, at what time he has the dream in which he sees me, what marvel if the dead be unconscious and insensible of these things, and for all that are seen by the living in their dreams, and say something which those on awaking find to be true. By angelical operations, then, I should think it is effected, whether permitted from above or commanded, that they seem in dreams to say something about burying of their bodies, when they, whose the bodies are utterly unconscious of it. Now this is sometimes serviceably done, whether for some sort of solace to the survivors, to whom pertain those dead whose likenesses appear to them as they dream, or whether that by these admonitions the human race may be made to have regard to humanity of sepulture, which, allow that it be no help to the departed, yet is their culpable irreligiousness in slighting of it. Sometimes, however, by fallacious visions, men are cast into great errors who deserve to suffer this. As, if one should see in a dream what Aeneas by poetic falsity is told to have seen in the world beneath, and there should appear to him the likeness of some unburied man, which should speak such words as Palinurus is said to have spoken to him, and when he awakes he should find the body in that place where he heard say while dreaming that it lay unburied, and was admonished and asked to bury it when found, and because he finds this to be true, should believe that the dead are buried on purpose, that their souls may pass to places from which he dreamed that the souls of men unburied are by an infernal law prohibited. Does he not, in believing all this, exceedingly swerve from the path of truth? Such, however, is human infirmity, that when in a dream a person shall see a dead man, he thinks it is the soul that he sees, but when he shall in like manner dream of a living man, he has no doubt that it is not a soul nor a body, but the likeness of a man that has appeared to him, just as if it were not possible, in regard of dead men, in the same sort unconscious of it, that it should not be their souls, but their likenesses that appear to the sleepers. Of a surety, when we were at Milan, we heard tell of a certain person of whom was demanded payment of a debt, with production of his deceased father's acknowledgment, which debt unknown to the son the father had paid, whereupon the man began to be very sorrowful, and to marvel that his father, while dying, did not tell him what he owed, when he also made his will. Then, in this exceeding anxiousness of his said father appeared to him in a dream, and made known to him where was the counter-acknowledgment by which that acknowledgment was cancelled, which when the young man had found and showed, he not only rebutted the wrongful claim of a false debt, but also got back his father's note of hand, which the father had not got back when the money was paid. Here then the soul of a man is supposed to have had care for his son, and to have come to him in his sleep, that, teaching him what he did not know, he might relieve him of a great trouble. But about the very same time as we heard this, it chanced at Carthage that the rhetorician Eusebius, who had been my disciple in that art, being, as he himself after our return to Africa told us the story, in course of lecturing to his disciples on Cicero's rhetorical books, as he looked over the portion of reading which he was to deliver on the following day, fell upon a certain passage, and, not being able to understand it, was scarce able to sleep for the trouble of his mind. In which night, as he dreamed, I expounded to him that which he did not understand. Nay, not I, but my likeness, while I was unconscious of the thing, and far away beyond the sea, it might be, doing, or it might be dreaming, some other thing, and not in the least caring for his cares. In what way these things come about, I know not, but in what way soever they come, why do we not believe it comes in the same way for a person in a dream to see a dead man, as it comes that he sees a living man? Both, no doubt, neither knowing nor caring who or where or when dreams of their images. Like dreams, moreover, are also some visions of persons awake, who have had their senses troubled, such as phrenetic persons, or those who are mad in any way, for they too talk to themselves, just as though they were speaking to people verily present, and as well with absent as with present, whose images they perceive, whether persons living or dead. But just as they which live are unconscious that they are seen of them and talk with them, for indeed they are not really themselves present, or themselves make speeches, but through troubled senses these persons are wrought upon by such like imaginary visions, just so they also, who have departed this life, to persons thus affected appear as present, while they be absent, and whether any man sees them in regard of their image, are themselves utterly unconscious. Similar to this is also that condition when persons, with their senses more profoundly in abeyance than is the case in sleep, are occupied with the like visions, for to them also appear images of quick and dead. But then, when they return to their senses, whatever dead they say they have seen are thought to have been verily with them, and they who hear these things pay no heed to the circumstance that there were seen in like manner the images of certain living persons, absent and unconscious. A certain man, by name Curma, of the municipal town of Tullium, which is hard by Hippo, a poor member of the Curia, scarcely competent to serve the office of a duumvir of that place, and a mere rustic, being ill and all his senses entranced, lay all but dead for several days, scarcely competent to serve the office of a duumvir of that place, and a mere rustic, being ill and all his senses entranced, lay all but dead for several days, a very slight breathing in his nostrils, which, on applying the hand, was just felt, and barely betokened that he lived, was all that kept him from being buried for dead. Not a limb did he stir, nothing did he take in the way of sustenance, neither in the eyes nor in any other bodily sense was he sensible of any annoyance that impinged upon them. Yet he was seeing many things, like as in a dream, which, when at last, after a great many days he woke up, he told that he had seen. And first, presently after he opened his eyes, "Let someone go," said he, "to the house of Curma the smith, and see what is doing there." And when someone had gone thither, the smith was found to have died in that moment, that the other had come back to his senses, and it might almost be said, revived from death. Then, as those who stood by eagerly listened, he told them how the other had been ordered to be had up, when he himself was dismissed, and that he had heard it said in that place from which he had returned, that it was not Curma of the Curia, but Curma the smith who had been ordered to be fetched to that place of the dead. Well, in these dreamlike visions of his, among those deceased persons whom he saw handled according to the diversity of their merits, he recognized also some whom he had known when alive. That they were the very persons themselves I might perchance have believed, had he not, in the course of this seeming dream of his, seen also some who are alive even to this present time, namely some clerks of his district, by whose presbyter there he was told to be baptized at Hippo by me, which things, he said, had also taken place. So then, he had seen a presbyter, clerks, myself, persons, to wit, not yet dead, in this vision in which he afterwards also saw dead persons. Why may he not be thought to have seen these last in the same way as he saw us, that is, both the one sort and the other, absent and unconscious, and consequently not the persons themselves, but similitudes of them just as of the places? He saw, namely, both a plot of ground where was that presbyter with the clerks, and Hippo, where he was by me seemingly baptized, in which spots assuredly he was not, when he seemed to himself to be there. For what was at that time going on there he knew not, which without doubt he would have known if he had verily been there. The sights beheld, therefore, were those which are not presented in the things themselves as they are, but shadowed forth in a sort of images of the things. In fine, after much that he saw, he narrated how he had, moreover, been led into paradise, and how it was there said to him, when he was thence dismissed to return to his own family, Go, be baptized, if thou wilt be in this place of the blessed. Thereupon, being admonished to be baptized by me, he said it was done already. He who was talking with him replied, Go, be truly baptized, for that thou didst but see in the vision. After this he recovered, went his way to Hippo. Easter was now approaching. He gave his name among the other combatants, alike with very many unknown to us, nor did he care to make known the vision to me or to any of the people. He was baptized. At the close of the holy days he returned to his own place. After the space of 2 years or more I learnt the whole matter, first through a certain friend of mine and his at my own table, while we were talking about some such matters. Then I took it up and made the man in his own person tell me the story, in the presence of some honest townsman, of his attesting the same, both concerning his marvellous illness, how he lay all but dead for many days, and about that other Kurma the smith, what I have mentioned above, and about all these matters, which while he was telling me they recalled to mind and assured me that they had also at that time heard them from his own lips. Wherefore, just as he saw his own baptism, and myself, and Hippo, and the basilica, and the baptistry, not in the very realities, but in a sort of similitudes of the things, and so likewise certain other living persons, without consciousness on the part of the same living persons, then why not just so those dead persons also, without consciousness on the part of the same dead persons? Why should we not believe these to be angelic operations, through dispensation of the providence of God, who maketh good use of both good things and evil, according to the unsearchable depth of his judgments, whether thereby the minds of mortals be instructed, or whether deceived, whether consoled, or whether terrified, according as unto each one there is to be either a showing of mercy, or a taking of vengeance, by him to whom, not without a meaning, the Church doth sing of mercy and of judgment. Let each, as it shall please him, take what I say. If the souls of the dead took part in the affairs of the living, and if it were their very selves that, when we see them, speak to us in sleep, to say nothing of others, there is my own self, whom my pious mother would no night fail to visit, that mother who by land and sea followed me that she might live with me. Far be the thought that she should not even console in his sadness the son whom she loved with an only love, whom she never wished to see mournful. But assuredly that which the sacred psalm sings in our ears is true, because my father and my mother have forsaken me, the Lord hath taken me up. Then if our parents have forsaken us, how take they part in our affairs and cares? But if parents do not, who else are there of the dead who should know what we are doing or what we suffer? Isaiah the prophet says, For thou art our father, because Abraham hath not known us, and Israel is not cognizant of us. If so great patriarchs were ignorant what was doing towards the people of them begotten, they to whom, believing God, the people itself to spring from their stock was promised, how are the dead mixed up with affairs and doings of the living, either for cognizance or help? How say we that those were favoured who deceased ere the evils came which followed hard upon the decease, if also after death they feel whatever things befall in the calamitousness of human life? Or haply do we err in saying this, and in accounting them to be quietly at rest, whom the unquiet life of the living makes solicitous? What then is that which, to the most godly King Josiah, God promised as a great benefit, that he should first die, that he might not see the evils which he threatened would come to that place and people? Which words of God are these? Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, concerning my words which thou hast heard, and didst fear before my face when thou didst hear what I have spoken concerning this place, and them which dwell therein, that it should be forsaken and under a curse, and hast rent thy garments and wept before me, and I have heard thee, saith the Lord of Sabaoth. Not so, Behold, I will add thee unto thy fathers, and thou shalt be added unto them in peace, and thine eyes shall not see all the evils which I am bringing upon this place, and upon them that dwell therein. He, frightened by God's comminations, had wept and rent his garments, and is made, by hastening on of his death, to be without care of all future evils, because he should so rest in peace that all those things he should not see. There then are the spirits of the departed, where they see not whatever things are doing or events happening in this life to men. Then how do they see their own graves or their own bodies, whether they lie cast away or buried? How do they take part in the misery of the living, when they are either suffering their own evils, if they have contracted such merits, or do rest in peace, as was promised to this Josiah, where they undergo no evils, either by suffering themselves or by compassionate suffering with others, freed from all evils which by suffering themselves or with others, while they lived here, they did undergo. Some man may say, if there be not in the dead any care for the living, how is it that the rich man, who is tormented in hell, asked Father Abraham to send Lazarus to his 5 brothers, not as yet dead, and to take course with them, that they should not come themselves also into the same place of torments? But does it follow that because the rich man said this, he knew what his brethren were doing, or what they were suffering at that time? Just in the same way had he care for the living, albeit what they were doing he wist not at all, as we have care for the dead, albeit what they do we confessedly wot not. But if we cared not for the dead, we should not, as we do, supplicate God on their behalf. In fine, Abraham did not send Lazarus, and also answered that they have here Moses and the prophets, whom they ought to hear, that they might not come to those torments. Where again it occurs to ask how it was that what was doing here Father Abraham himself wist not, while he knew that Moses and the prophets are here, that is, their books, by obeying which men should escape the torments of hell, and knew, in short, that rich man to have lived in delights, but the poor man Lazarus to have lived in labours and sorrows. For this also he says to him, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime hast received good things, but Lazarus evil things. He knew then these things which had taken place, of course, among the living, not among the dead. True, but it may be that, not while the things were doing in their lifetime, but after their death, he learnt these things by information of Lazarus, that it be not false which the prophet saith, Abraham hath not known us. So then we must confess that the dead indeed do not know what is here doing, but while it is in doing here. Afterwards, however, they hear it from those who from hence go to them at their death. Not indeed everything, but what things those are allowed to make known, who are suffered also to remember these things, and which it is meet for those to hear, whom they inform of the same. It may be also that from the angels who are present in the things which are doing here, the dead do hear somewhat, which for each one of them to hear, he judgeth right, to whom all things are subject. For were there not angels who could be present in places both of quick and dead, the Lord Jesus had not said, It came to pass that also the poor man died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. Therefore, now here, now there, were they able to be, who from hence bore thither whom God willed. It may be also that the spirits of the dead do learn some things which are doing here, what things it is necessary that they should know, and what persons it is necessary should know the same, not only things past or present, but even future, by the Spirit of God revealing them, like as not all men but the prophets, while they lived here, did know, nor even they all things, but only what things to be revealed to them the providence of God judged meet. Moreover, that some of the dead are sent to the living, as on the other hand Paul from the living was rapt into paradise, divine scripture doth testify. For Samuel the prophet, appearing to Saul when living, predicted even what should befall the king, although some think it was not Samuel himself that could have been by magical arts evoked, but that some spirit, meet for so evil works, did figure his semblance. Though the book Ecclesiasticus, which Jesus, son of Sirach, is reputed to have written, and which, on account of some resemblance of style, is pronounced to be Solomon's, contains in the praise of the fathers that Samuel, even when dead, did prophesy. But if this book be spoken against from the canon of the Hebrews, because it is not contained therein, what shall we say of Moses, whom certainly we read both in Deuteronomy to have died, and in the Gospel to have, together with Elias, who died not, appeared unto the living? Hence too is solved that question, how it is that the martyrs, by the very benefits which are given to them that pray, indicate that they take an interest in the affairs of men, if the dead know not what the quick are doing. For not only by effects of benefits, but in the very beholding of men, it is certain that the confessor Felix, whose denizenship among you thou piously lovest, appeared when the barbarians were attacking Nola, as we have heard not by uncertain rumours but by sure witnesses. But such things are of God exhibited far otherwise than as the usual order hath itself unto each kind of creatures a portion. For it does not follow because water was, when it pleased the Lord, in a moment changed into wine, that we are not to regard the worth and efficacy of water in the proper order of the elements, as distinct from the rarity, or rather singularity, of that divine work. Nor because Lazarus rose again, therefore that every dead man rises when he will, or that a lifeless man is raised up by a living, in the same way as a sleeping man by one who is awake. Other be the limits of human things, other the signs of divine virtues, other they be that are naturally, other that be miraculously done. Albeit both unto nature God is present that he may be, and unto miracles nature is not lacking. We are not to think, then, that to be interested in the affairs of the living is in the power of any departed who please, only because to some men's healing or help the martyrs be present. But rather we are to understand that it must needs be by a divine power that the martyrs are interested in affairs of the living, from the very fact that for the departed to be by their proper nature interested in affairs of the living is impossible. Howbeit it is a question which surpasses the strength of my understanding, after what manner the martyrs aid them who by them, it is certain, are helped, whether themselves by themselves be present at the same time in so different places, and by so great distance lying apart one from another, either where their memorials are, or beside their memorials, wheresoever they are felt to be present, or whether, while they themselves in a place congruous with their merits are removed from all converse with mortals, and yet do in a general sort pray for the needs of their suppliants, like as we pray for the dead, to whom however we are not present, nor know where they be, or what they be doing. God Almighty, who is everywhere present, neither bounded in with us, nor remote from us, hearing and granting the martyrs' prayers, doth by angelic ministries everywhere diffused afford to men those solaces, to whom, in the misery of this life, he seeth meet to afford the same, and touching his martyrs, doth where he will, when he will, how he will, and chiefest through their memorials, because this he knoweth to be expedient for us unto edifying of the faith of Christ, for whose confession they suffered, by marvellous and ineffable power and goodness cause their merits to be had in honour. A matter is this too high that I should have power to attain unto it, too abstruse that I should be able to search it out, and therefore which of these two be the case, or whether perchance both one and the other be the case, that sometimes these things be done by very presence of the martyrs, sometimes by angels taking upon them the person of the martyrs, I dare not define. Rather I would seek this at them who know it. For it is not to be thought that no man knows these things, not indeed he who thinks he knows and knows not, for there be gifts of God, who bestows on these some one, on those some other, according to the Apostle, who says that to each one is given the manifestation of the Spirit to profit withal. To one indeed, saith he, is given by the Spirit discourse of wisdom, to another discourse of science according to the same Spirit, while to another faith in the same Spirit, to another the gift of healings in one Spirit, to one workings of miracles, to one prophecy, to one discerning of spirits, to one kinds of tongues, to one interpretation of discourses. But all these worketh one and the same Spirit, dividing to every man severally as he will. Of all these spiritual gifts, whom the Apostle hath rehearsed, to whomsoever is given discerning of spirits, the same knoweth these things as they are meet to be known. Such, we may believe, was that John the monk, whom the elder Theodosius, the emperor, consulted concerning the issue of the civil war, seeing he had also the gift of prophecy. For that not each several person has a several one of those gifts, but that one man may have more gifts than one, I make no question. This John then, when once a certain most religious woman desired to see him, and to obtain this, did, through her husband, make vehement entreaty, refused indeed this request, because he had never allowed this to women, but go, said he, tell thy wife, she shall see me this night, but in her sleep. And so it came to pass, and he gave her advice, whatever was meet to be given to a wedded believing woman, and she, on her awaking, made known to her husband that she had seen a man of God, such as he knew him to be, and what she had been told by him. The person who learned this from them reported it to me, a grave man and a noble and most worthy to be believed. But if I myself had seen that holy monk, because, if it is said, he was most patient in hearing questions and most wise in answering, I would have sought of him, as touching our question, whether he himself came to that woman in sleep, that is to say, his spirit in the form of his body, just as we dream that we see ourselves in the form of our own body, or whether, while he himself was doing something else, or if asleep was dreaming of something else, it was either by an angel or in some other way that such vision took place in the woman's dream, and that it would so be as he promised, he himself foreknew by the spirit of prophecy revealing the same. For if he was himself present to her in her dream, of course it was by miraculous grace that he was enabled so to do, not by nature, and by God's gift, not by faculty of his own. But if, while he was doing some other thing or sleeping, and occupied with other sights, the woman saw him in her sleep, then doubtless some such thing took place, as that is which we read in the Acts of the Apostles, where the Lord Jesus speaks to Ananias concerning Saul, and informs him that Saul has seen Ananias coming unto him, while Ananias himself wist not of it. The man of God would make answer to me of these things, as the case might be, and then about the martyrs I should go on to ask of him whether they be themselves present in dreams, or in whatever other way, to those who see them, in what shape they will, and above all when the demon in men confess themselves tormented by the martyrs, and ask them to spare them, or whether these things be wrought through angelic powers, to the honour and commendation of the saints for men's profit, while those are in supreme rest, and wholly free for other far better sights apart from us, and praying for us. For it chanced at Milan, at the tomb of the holy martyrs Protasius and Gervasius, that Ambrose the bishop, at that time living, being expressly named, in like manner as were the dead whose names they were rehearsing, the demons confessed him and besought him to spare them, he being the while otherwise engaged, and when this was taking place altogether unwitting of it. Or whether indeed these things were wrought, some whiles by very presence of the martyrs, other whiles by that of angels, and whether it be possible, or by what tokens possible, for us to discriminate these two cases, or whether to perceive and to judge of these things none be able, but he which hath that gift through God's Spirit, dividing unto every man severally as he will. The same John, methinks, would discourse to me of all these matters as I should wish, that either by his teaching I might learn, and what I should be told should know to be true and certain, or I should believe what I knew not upon his telling me what things he knew. But if peradventure he should make answer out of Holy Scripture, and say, things higher than thou seek thou not, and things stronger than thou search thou not, but what the Lord hath commanded thee, of those things bethink thee away. This also I should thankfully accept, for it is no small gain, if, when any things are obscure and uncertain to us, and we are not able to comprehend them, it be at any rate clear and certain that we are not to seek them, and what thing each one wishes to learn, accounting it to be profitable that he should know it, he should learn that it is no harm that he know it not. Which things being so, let us not think that to the dead for whom we have a care anything reaches, save what by sacrifices either of the altar or of prayers or of alms we solemnly supplicate, although not to all for whom they are done be they profitable, but to them only by whom while they live it is obtained that they should be profitable. But forasmuch as we discern not who these be, it is meet to do them for all regenerate persons, that none of them may be passed by to whom these benefits may and ought to reach. For better it is that these things shall be superfluously done to them whom they neither hinder nor help, than lacking to them whom they help. More diligently, however, doth each man these things for his own near and dear friends, in order that they may be likewise done unto him by his. But as for the burying of the body, whatever is bestowed on that is no aid of salvation, but an office of humanity, according to that affection by which no man ever hateth his own flesh. Whence it is fitting that he take what care he is able for the flesh of his neighbour, when he is gone that bare it. And if they do these things who believe not the resurrection of the flesh, how much more are they beholden to do the same who do believe? That so an office of this kind bestowed upon a body, dead but yet to rise again and to remain to eternity, may also be in some sort a testimony of the same faith. But that a person is buried at the memorials of the martyrs, this, I think, so far profits the departed, that while commending him also to the martyrs' patronage, the affection of supplication on his behalf is increased. Here, to the things thou hast thought meet to inquire of me, thou hast such reply as I have been able to render, which, if it be more than enough prolix, thou must excuse this, for it was done through love of holding longer talk with thee. For this book, then, how thy charity shall receive it, let me, I pray thee, know by a second letter, though, doubtless, it will be more welcome for its bearer's sake, to wit our brother and fellow presbyter Candidianus, whom, having been by thy letter made acquainted with him, I have welcomed with all my heart, and am loath to let him depart. For greatly in the charity of Christ hath he by his presence consoled us, and, to say truth, it was at his instance that I have done thy bidding. For with so great businesses is my heart distraught, that had not he, by ever and anon putting me in mind, not suffered me to forget it, assuredly to thy questioning reply of mind had not been forthcoming. End of On Care to be had for the Dead by Augustine of Hippo. Resurrection of the Dead by Athanasius of Athens. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. All the opinions and notions of men concerning the truth of things that be have a mixture of something false, not that it proceeds from any substantive principle in the nature of the thing, or from any fault in each particular subject, but is rather occasioned by the perverseness of some, who have honoured the bad seed that tares, to the destruction of the truth. This appears very plain from such as have of old employed themselves in speculations of this kind, who differ both from the ancients and from their own contemporary, but not least from the confusion of the common notions concerning this subject. Men of such a turn of mind have left no sort of truth uncorrupted, not even the being, the knowledge and the providence of a God, and the plain consequences thereof, nay, not the very things which delineate to us the law of religion. Some openly and once for all deny the truth about such things, and others give them such a colour as suits their inclinations. It therefore is proper, I think, for those who discourse on these topics to make use of two lines of argument, the one on behalf of the truth, the other in explanation of it. On behalf of the truth, to those who disbelieve or doubt, in explanation of it, to those who are of ingenuous tempers and receive the truth with good will. Wherefore, in treating the subject now under debate, what is proper at each time must be observed with accuracy, our words be measured thereby, and our reasoning adapted thereunto, lest, if we should seem to use always the same method, we neglect convenience and the place suitable for each particular thing. For, in the order of demonstration and physical consequence, the arguments which prove any truth are always antecedent to such as only explain it, but with regard to what is convenient, vice versa, the demonstrative may precede the explanatory, for neither could the farmer with propriety commit his seed to the ground before he had cleared the wild wood, and such things as would hinder and choke the growth of the good seed. Nor does the physician give the patient restorative drugs until he has expelled the existing disease or checked its advance. So neither can truth be established, whilst false notions keep their place in the mind of the hearers and oppose the arguments of the teacher. Wherefore I also, looking to what is most expedient, sometimes place the arguments proving the truth before those which are explanatory of it, and in the same manner, with a view to what is fitting, it seems desirable to act in my observations on the subject of the resurrection, for on this subject also we find men who altogether disbelieve, but some who doubt, and some even of those who have received the first principles, who are as much perplexed as those who doubt. But, what is most unreasonable of all, that they have these feelings, though they have no occasion of doubt from the things themselves, nor can give any reasonable reason why they disbelieve or are in difficulty. Let us view the matter thus. If every doubt does not arise in the mind spontaneously and from some inconsiderate thought, but with some good cause and grounds founded on truth, for then it has good reason when the thing itself, about which they doubt, seems to be doubtful, for to doubt those things that are not doubtful is the part of men who have no sound judgment about the truth. Then it behoves those who disbelieve or doubt concerning the resurrection to state their opinion about it, not according to their own unreasonable fancy, or to gratify the intemperate, but either to deduce man's origin from no cause, which indeed is also very easy to be refuted, or to refer the cause of things to God, to look to the hypothesis of this doctrine, and by it to prove that the resurrection has nothing credible in it. But this they will do if they shall be able to show either that God cannot, or will not again join and form into the shape of the same men those bodies which have died, or are wholly in a state of dissolution. But if they cannot do this, let them cease from this impious doubt, and from blaspheming what they would not. For that they do not speak the truth in stating either his want of power or his want of will, I shall make clear from what I shall here say. A man's want of power is known to be such from the truth, either from his not knowing what is to be done, or from his not having sufficient power to do well what has been determined on. For he who does not know anything of what ought to be done can neither attempt nor do at all that which he is ignorant of, and he who knows well what is to be done, and whence it may be done, and how, but altogether has not power to do what he knows, or has not enough power, will not attempt it at all, if he is wise and considers his own power. But if he attempts it unadvisedly, he will not accomplish his intentions. But neither is it possible for God to be ignorant of the nature of the bodies that will rise again, either as regards a whole limb or a part, nor where each of the decayed limbs goes, and what part of the elements has received the decayed part which goes to its kindred, although among men it may seem difficult to distinguish that which has been naturally again united to the whole mass. For he who is not unacquainted before the particular formation of each, either with the nature of the elements that would be necessary, from which to form men's bodies, nor the parts of these from which he was about to take whatsoever seemed suitable to the constitution of the human body, it is manifest that after the whole has decayed, he cannot be ignorant where each is gone, of those things which he took for the completion of each. For as regards the order of things that prevails amongst us, and our judgment in the case of others, to know beforehand things that have not happened is the greatest. But looking to the majesty of God, and to his wisdom, both according to nature, it is equally easy to know beforehand things that have never been, and to know afterwards about things that have been dissolved. And indeed, as regards his power, that it is equal to the task of raising up bodies is shown by the first creation of those same. For if he created the bodies of men, which were non-existent at their first formation, and the principle of such, so when they are dissolved, in whatever manner it may happen, he will raise them with the same facility, for this too is equally possible for him. And it is no detriment to the argument, whether we lay down the first principles as out of matter, or whether they make the bodies of men to have been formed out of the elements as principles, or out of seed. For whatever power is required to give shape to that which passes among them for shapeless, and to arrange in many and diverse species that which is without species and unarranged, and to bring together the parts of the elements into one, and to distribute into many the seed which is one and simple, and to articulate that which is inarticulated, and to give life to that which is not alive, the same power can also rejoin in one that which has been dissolved, and raise up that which is overthrown, and make the dead live again, and change the corruptible into incorruption. Or further, the same being, the same power and wisdom, can distinguish and separate the parts of the human body devoured by whatsoever number of beasts which are used to attack such bodies, and take their fill thereof, can separate them from the mass, and again unite them with the same limbs or parts, whether they have gone into one of those or into many, and from thence into others, and even if, decaying in those same animals, they have returned to their first principles, according to the natural analysis into such. And yet this is the main objection in some persons of considerable reputation for learning, who have attached undue weight to the doubts of the multitude. These then say that many bodies of men drowned at sea or in rivers become a prey to fishes. Many bodies of men slain in battles or by other unhappy cause or casualty are never buried, but devoured by beasts and birds, that the limbs and parts of bodies thus destroyed and incorporating with the bodies of many beasts become by way of food parts thereof, and that, in the first place, it is impossible to distinguish them from the others. And in the second place, there is another objection, that the bodies of such beasts as have eaten human bodies, as many at least as are fit for man to eat, are frequently eaten by men, and become amalgamated with the bodies of those who have partaken of them, necessarily, therefore, that those parts of the beast which were composed of human flesh do now again incorporate and become part of another human body, seeing that the beasts which were intermediate between the two convey what have been their food to those men of whom they themselves have become the food. Then, to give this objection the most formidable appearance, they set out instances of such as have eaten their own children, in famine or madness, or by some fearful deceit of their enemies have eaten them for ordinary meats. The well-known table of Medea, Thyestes' tragical feast, and numbers of strange stories from all nations, Greeks and barbarians, are brought as instances, and from hence they conclude, as they think, the impossibility of the resurrection, since it is manifestly impossible that these same members should be part of several bodies and rise with them. But either the limbs of the first cannot be brought together, since the parts that compose them have been transferred to others, or, if these be given to the former, the latter will be in want of them and be imperfect. But this objection will appear to be entirely founded on their ignorance of the power and wisdom of God, for he hath appropriated a peculiar food and nutriment to every nature and species of creatures, and doth not permit every body, without distinction, to enter into union or composition with any other. Nor would the Almighty be perplexed with separating parts of different natures, could they be joined together, since he permits every creature to go through such active and passive properties as it was at first endued with, and sometimes suspends such laws of nature, and concedes or turns them for the executing any purpose that he will. Moreover, our adversaries seem to be under a surprising ignorance of the nutriment and nature of creatures, or they would know that all food taken into the body does not become fitting nourishment to the body. Several things, as soon as received into the folds of the stomach, are thrown up, pass through, or are otherwise discharged, so as not at all to admit of the first natural concoction, much less mix with the body nourished. As then the much greater part even of things digested, and receiving the first change, mix not at all with the parts which receive nourishment, since some parts lose in the very stomach their nutritive power, and others are separated in the second change, and the action that goes on in the liver, and are thrown off elsewhere for other purposes than that of nourishment. And since the change which takes place in the liver does not wholly tend to the nourishment of the man, but goes into natural superfluities, and sometimes the nutriment which is left in the limbs and parts of the body nourished turns to something else, according to the prevalence of that which is redundant or superfluous, and which corrupts or assimilates to itself whatever comes near it. Since therefore the several kinds of animals are so different in their natures, and Providence hath varied the food for each, as is most convenient to the species, and thirdly, there being a purification and separation of the food according to the animal, it necessarily results that all which is not adapted for the aliment of the creature is separated and discharged by some natural mode, or is changed to something else, as not being able to blend, and therefore that the power of the nutriment suits the nature of the animal, that this alone becomes pure nourishment, and if we give true names to things, having passed all the various secretions and filtrations of the body, ought to be considered as the aliment of the creature, and whatever was noxious and destructive to the constitution, and was therefore discharged, all that load of sustenance taken into the stomach for its repletion and the sating of the appetite, is not, strictly speaking, to be styled nourishment. And no one can doubt that this is united to the body nourished and blended and interwoven with all the limbs and parts of the body. But should anything of a different nature be eaten by any animal, if that body be vigorous and strong, it will be expelled, but if it be too weak to effect this, such aliment easily gets the better and corrupts it, and turns to evil humours and noxious qualities, as contributing nothing proper or agreeable to the body nourished. We have a convincing argument for this in most animals, where it is observable that pain, danger, and death are the consequences of any unnatural drug being taken in some fit of desire. It wholly destroys the body nourished, for all animals are preserved by what is proper for, and destroyed by what is contrary to, their natures. If then, together with the difference of animals differing in nature, their food also has been distinguished, and even of this not all that the animal gets, nor any chance portion of it, admits of mixture with the body, but that alone which has been purified by all the process of secretion, and has perfectly changed into union with each body, and is fitted for the body nourished, it is clear that things of a different nature can never be blended with those bodies for which they do not form a suitable and correspondent nourishment, but either goes off by the belly before it produces any other juice, crude and rotten, or if it remains longer, causes pain or disease difficult to be cured, corrupting also with it the natural food, and even the animal that requires the food. But even if it ever is expelled by medicines or better food, or by any natural means, it passes off with no little injury, because it has no harmony with the natural substances, by its being incompatible in its nature. But generally, if we admit that the aliment, calling it so out of regard to custom, which enters from these things, though unnatural, is secreted and changes into some one of things moist or dry, hot or cold. Yet even thus they will get no advantage from these concessions, since bodies which rise again are composed again out of their own parts, but none of the aforesaid things is a part, or has the form or arrangement of a part, nor remains at all in the parts of the body nourished, or rises with it when it rises, nor contributes anything towards the life, neither blood, nor phlegm, nor bile, nor breath. For neither will the bodies nourished then want those things which they used to want, as the use of those things on which they were nourished has been taken away together with the want and corruption of the bodies nourished. In the next place, because, even if one should suppose that the change from such food reached even to the flesh, not even so will the necessary result that the flesh just changed from such food, attaching to the body of any other man, tends again as a limb to fill up the composition of that man, seeing that the flesh which has received the addition of it does not always keep what it has received, nor does the addition made to it remain stationary to the place where it was added, but receives also much change in both directions, at one time harassed by toil and thought, at another time wasting with pains or fatigue or diseases, and by bad temperature resulting from heat or cold, because the humours, which change along with the flesh and the fat, do not receive their nourishment so as to remain what they are. Since then the flesh is liable to such changes, much more might one expect to find flesh that has been nurtured on improper food suffering in this way, at one time rising in a swelling and becoming bloated from what it has received, and then again throwing it off somehow or other, and shrinking either from some one of the causes before named, or from several, and that there only remains in the limbs which it is adapted to bind together, or to cover, or to nourish, that one food selected by nature and adapted to those limbs, with which it fills out the natural life and the toils of life. But neither if the subjects now just examined are properly judged of, nor if the arguments insisted on by them are conceded and allowed, can what they say be shown to be true, nor can the bodies of men ever be blended with those of the same nature, whether from ignorance they have not perceived the taste, having taken part of such a body through the means of some other, or whether of themselves they have, from want or frenzy, been polluted by the body of one of their own kindred, unless at least any beasts in human form have escaped our notice, or such as have a nature blended out of men and beasts, such as the more daring of the poets have been used to imagine. But why should I speak of those bodies which are not assigned as food to any kind of animal, but which are allotted, in honour of their nature, only burial in the earth, when the Creator has not assigned even any other animal as food for those of its own species, though in some others there is a natural food assigned them from animals of a different species? If therefore they are able to show that the flesh of men has been allotted to men for food, nothing prevents but that their eating one another should be according to their nature, as any other of the things conceded by nature, or that those who dare say such things should luxuriate on the bodies of their dearest friends as most suited to them, or even feed those who are most friendly towards them on such kind of food. But if it be even impious to name this, and a most hateful pollution that men should partake of the flesh of men, and more detestable than any other unlawful or unnatural feasting or other action, and if that which is contrary to nature can never become nourishment to the members and parts of the body which require it, and that which does not change to nourishment can never unite with those parts which it is not calculated by nature to nourish, neither can the bodies of men ever mix with similar bodies, for which they are not naturally food, though they should often pass through their bowels by some most bitter calamity. But separating from the nutritive faculty, and being dispersed back to those elements from which they first drew their nature, they unite with them as long time as it may be, and being again separated from thence by the wisdom and power of him who adjusts every animal nature with its proper faculties, they are blended each suitably with each, whether burnt by fire, or dissolved by water, or eaten up by wild beasts, or any other animal whatever, or whether any part cut off from the whole body be dissolved before the other limbs, and being again united to one another, occupy the same place, to the harmony and completion of the same body, and the resurrection and life of the body that is dead or altogether decayed. To extend this subject further would be unseasonable, for the decision about it is acknowledged, at least by all who are not half brutes. But inasmuch as many points are of use to our present discussion, I now beforehand ask of those who recur to the works of men and the men who made them, who are unable to mend their works when broken, or worn out by time, or in any other way also destroyed, and then try to show that, as is the case with potters and carpenters, so God also never would be willing, nor if he willed would be able to raise again a body that is dead and decayed, and who do not consider that they thus affront God in the worst way, by comparing together the powers of those who in every way differ, or rather of those who use these, the means and the artificial aids, with those that belong to nature. It would be reprehensible to be serious on this subject, for it is foolish in truth to contradict such superficial and vain arguments. Far more reasonable and truest of all is to say that what is impossible with man is possible with God. But if by these very things as probable, and by all the points which we have examined a little before, reason shows it is possible, it is clear that it is not impossible, nor is it indeed foreign to God's will. For what he is unwilling to do must be so because it is either unjust or unworthy, and again that which is unjust is so with reference to him that shall rise again, or some other besides him. But that no one of these external, or of those that are numbered among the living, is wronged is clear, for no intellectual beings can suffer any injury by the dead bodies being raised, their existence still continuing, and no loss or dishonour thereby accruing to them from the resurrection of the dead. Nor can it be any detriment to irrational or inanimate creatures, for after the resurrection they will not exist again, and no injury can be done to what exists not. But supposing they should exist, they would suffer no injustice by men's bodies rising again. For if now, in the present state of things, during their being enslaved to the power of man, and made subservient to the yoke and to all kinds of service, they are not injured, much less will they suffer injustice when man is raised immortal, and far above the indigent state of this life, wherein they will no more be obnoxious to labour. For not even if they were endued with the powers of reasoning and speaking would they blame their Creator as being unjustly made inferior to man, and not admitted to be partakers of the resurrection, for creatures of such unequal natures as man and beast would be likely to have a different purpose assigned for each by the just God. Lastly, there is another reason why brutes cannot be said to have a claim of justice or to suffer injustice, because they have no sense of justice. Neither again can the person raised be said in any ways to be injured, for man is composed of soul and body, and neither of these is injured. No sane man will say that the soul suffers injustice, because in saying that he will inadvertently include also the present life. For if, when it inhabited a body corruptible and obnoxious to pains, it then was not unjustly treated, much less will the soul be injured, when it hath appointed for its seat of residence a glorious and incorruptible body. Neither can the body be injured, for if being corruptible it was not unjust to unite it to an incorruptible partner, the soul, it will not be unjust to unite both again, when both are incorruptible. And lastly, it cannot be said to be unbecoming God's majesty to raise and join together bodies after dissolution, for since to make what is much inferior, to produce a body mortal and subject to pains, is not unbecoming God, it will be much less so to do what is superior, to renew the deceased body, free both from decay and from all passions. If then, from the premises which naturally come first, and their indubitable consequences, we have demonstrated the present question in all its parts, it is clear that the resurrection of the decayed body is a work possible for the power, free to the will, and worthy of the majesty of God. For by these were shown the falsity of the contrary opinion, and the absurdity of unbelievers. Why need I say that the parts of this demonstration harmonize and cohere with one another, if indeed we may speak of coherence as if they were dissimilar, and ought not rather to say that what is possible to God, God can will, and that which God can will is possible to him, and consistent with the majesty of him that wills? But we have proved sufficiently in the foregoing observations that we must after different methods argue for and concerning the truth, and how each differs from the other, and when and to whom each is useful. But for the general good, and that the present discourse may be uniform in its parts, I shall, from the same premises, or some of the same kind, here make a fresh beginning. The one argument naturally stands first, the second, as it were, is a bodyguard to the first, clears the way and removes all obstructions and impediments to the truth. For reasoning concerning truth, being necessary for the safety and security of mankind, is chief both by nature and order of method and by use. By nature as being that which gives a knowledge of the subject, by order as that which must exist at the same time, in and with the things being reasoned upon, and lastly, in point of usefulness, as being that which procures security and safety to all that examine into and understand it. But all disputation for the truth of any object is inferior in nature and dignity, it being less honourable to confute a false notion than to establish the truth. It is second in order of method, because it has its strength against those who think erroneously, but erroneous opinion springs up from the over-sowing and the corrupt seed. But though thus they stand in the disposition of nature, yet such a discourse for the truth is often put first and becomes useful as rooting out infidelity, which troubles some, scepticism or false notions, which stand in the way of newcomers. But to conclude this distinction, both are designed for the same end, both advance piety, that which establishes truth and that which detects error. Yet they are different from each other. One is, as I said, necessary to all believers, and such as have any regard to truth and the salvation of their souls. The other, upon some occasions and with regard to the persons, is more proper to be applied. Having then premised thus much briefly to remind the reader of what we have already said, I shall proceed to my subject and confirm the truth of the resurrection by the following reasons. First, from the end and design of the creation of the first man and all his descendants, although they were not born in a similar manner. Secondly, from the common nature of all men, as men. And thirdly, from their future judgment at the hands of their Creator, with reference to the time each has lived and the laws he has lived by, and which judgment, no one doubts, will be a just one, which must be manifested to the distribution of rewards and punishments. The first argument is drawn from the design of the Creator, where we are to inquire whether man was made undesignedly and to no intent, or whether he was made for some purpose, and if so, whether he was made simply to live and persevere in the state he was born in, or to be of use. And if so, whether the use to his Creator or to some other creature nearer to God, more favoured by the divine care than himself. And here, from a process of reasoning more widely, we find that no being acting with prudence, and urged to action by reasoning judgment, can possibly do anything with forethought, and yet do it in vain, but either for his own advantage or for some other whom he cares for, or for the sake of the thing he does, being moved to the production of it by some natural impulse and affection, as, for instance, for I will speak by a similitude, that the subject may be clear, a man builds a house for his own use. He builds, too, stables for oxen and camels, or such beasts as are of use to him, each shed suitable for each, not for his own immediate use as it appears, though the final cause be his advantage. The proximate is the security of the beasts which he protects. He begets children, too, and not for his own profit or the advantage of others, but solely for their own sakes, that they may live and remain as far as is possible after him, thus compensating his own death by the succession of his children and of his descendants, and thus hoping to immortalize his mortality. Upon these motives men act, but God could not create man inconsiderately, for God is wise, and no work of wisdom is in vain. Neither did he create him for his own necessity, since God cannot want anything, and by him who wants nothing, nothing can be done for his own necessity. Neither did he lastly create man for the service of any of his other works, for no being endued with reason and judgment can be thought to be formed for the use and service of a creature of either a superior or an inferior condition, but entirely for its own life and continuance. Nor can any other reason than this be assigned for man's creation, since, on the one hand, immortal beings are naturally above all wants and necessities, and independent of men, for supporting their existence, and, on the other hand, all the irrational creatures are subject to him. They all serve man in the way for which each was created, and make not use of man as their property. It neither was nor is natural for the lordly and sovereign nature of man to be made subject to inferior creatures, or the rational being to be enslaved to the irrational, which by its own nature is incapable of governing. If then man was not created undesignedly and to no purpose, for none of God's works made by his design can be to no purpose, nor for any private emolument of the great Creator of all things, or that of any other creature, it follows evidently that, according to the first and widest view of the matter, God's regard for man's happiness and his goodness towards all his works and his wisdom must have been the only motives for his creation of man, and also, if we push our inquiry more closely, that his creatures might live, but not a momentary life, now born and presently lost again forever. So small a portion of being God may have allotted for reptiles, birds, and fishes, and to all the irrational animals, but to men who bear in them his own image, to whom he gave reason and a capacity of judgment, God hath given too an eternal existence, that, having arrived here to a knowledge of the Creator and his power and wisdom, following law and justice, they might enjoy an eternity in the exercise of those things which they practised in their life, whilst fettered with their mortal and corruptible bodies. For those things which are created for the use of some others, upon the ceasing of those others, will themselves cease also, and not remain uselessly, since God cannot be thought to give existence to anything in vain, and to no end or purpose. But if the existence of any creature according to its nature was the ultimate end of his creation, such creature necessarily will never be liable to any cause which will altogether obliterate its existence, since the same natural reason for its existence once continues to prevail always. But since this is always seen in their existence, the animal that is created must necessarily be preserved, doing and suffering whatever belongs to its nature, each of its parts fulfilling its own duties, and the soul remaining undisturbed in its nature, and fulfilling its natural duties which are to guide the impulses of the body, and to judge and measure whatever befalls by suitable standards and measures, and the body also continuing to be affected with natural objects, and to receive such changes as are proper for it. And among other transmutations of age, form, magnitude, admitting also of a resurrection, which is also a species of change, and the last it shall endure, and changes those which then survive into a better state. Relying upon this no less than upon those changes which are already past, and considering our nature, we content ourselves with the present necessitous and perishing life, as suitable to the state of this world, and certainly assure ourselves of an everlasting life hereafter. And this we believe, not vainly persuaded by men, nor deluding ourselves by vain hopes, but induced by the most forcible argument, even the very design of the Creator in the formulation of man, of an immortal soul and corruptible body, and enduing him with reason, and the principle of preserving and improving such faculties as have been given him, as of advantage to life and his own rational nature, well knowing that he would not have made so glorious a creature as man, and given such excellences to him suited for immortality, if he had not wished his work to last. If then God created man for the enjoyment of a rational life, and for the contemplation of his magnificence, wisdom, and power in all the works of the creation, his existence, according to God's purpose and his own nature, must last as long as there is matter of wonder and admiration in the universe. Thus the end of man's creation proves existence forever, and that proves the resurrection, since without the latter, immortality would be impossible. It appears, therefore, from what has been said about the end of man's creation and the design of God, that there must be a resurrection of the dead. Having therefore examined into the reason why man was brought into this world, we are to consider what follows next in the order of nature or connection of the subject. To the cause of man's existence succeeds his nature, and then the just judgment of God following upon these, and to conclude all, the end of life. Having then sufficiently discoursed on the foregoing topics, I proceed to consider the nature of man. Our demonstration of true doctrine, or of anything proposed for examination, if it gain belief for what is said, must be drawn not from abroad, nor from particular dogmas and opinions, but from the more obvious and general opinions of mankind, or the sequence between premises and their conclusion. For the question is either about first principles, in which case we need only to be reminded of our natural feelings, or it is about the conclusions which naturally follow our first principles, and the sequence between them, where method is required to show what truly follows from those leading ideas, so as neither to neglect the truth, nor fail of being right about it, nor to confound together things that are naturally classified and distinct, or to break the physical connection between them. Whoever therefore doth in earnest desire to inform himself of the truth of the present question, whether there is or is not a resurrection of the dead, must first weigh exactly the sum and collective force of all the arguments offered to support the proposition, and what particular part of the demonstration each argument maintains. Which is first, which is second, which third, and which last in the chain. Let him then, in methodizing the arguments, first put the end of man's creation, that is, the reason or motive on which God created him, and then the nature of man created, not as being second in importance, but because the two, when joined together, will not be so easy to be understood, though they exist together and mutually conspire to establish the present doctrine. From these reasons, as from first principles drawn from God's works, the resurrection is clearly proved. But it may also be demonstrated no less from the consideration of God's providence, as appears in a just distribution of rewards and punishments according to the actions of men, that their end may be correspondent to their lives. For several have supported the whole question on a third way of proving the resurrection, from the necessity of there being a judgment, but this argument is shown to be false, because all who die rise again, but not all who rise will be judged. If the resurrection was only for just judgment, the holy and religious, and all such as have done good actions, would have no need to rise again, that is, very young children. But since it is allowed for all to rise, both others and those who died in early youth themselves also prove that the resurrection is not grounded upon this principal reason for the sake of the judgment, but on the design of the Creator and the nature of the beings created. Though the reason which has now been advanced on the foregoing argument be enough to establish the certainty of the resurrection as being what by natural sequence follows a dissolution of the body, yet it is best perhaps not to shrink from any of the proposed arguments, but in harmony with what has been said, and for the benefit of such as shall not be able to go through with the rest by themselves, to show the force of each of the conclusions we have arrived at, and especially the nature of created man, which leads us to the same notion, and affords equal proof concerning the resurrection. For if the whole nature of man be compounded of a mortal body and an immortal soul united, and God gave not either to the soul or body as two separate things, and without relation to each other, such a creation or life or general existence, but to man, that is, to these two joined together, that these two integral parts, soul and body, with which men were born and lived, should again, after life is ended, proceed together to some common end, it necessarily results that as the living being, compounded of both, is one, combining the feelings both of the soul and of the body, and acts and fulfills all the duties of feeling and reason, that the union of these should tend to some one end, that all should concur in all respects to one harmony and fellow feeling in man, whether it be his birth, or his nature, or his actions and passions, or his life and the ends suited to his nature. If there be one union and fellow feeling of the whole animal, both of those things which grow out of the soul, and those which are fulfilled by the body, there must also be one end for all these. And this will perfectly be done if the same animal for which such a purpose was designed to be raised in the same form, but the same animal will be raised if the same parts be again restored in the same form, but the same parts will be according to the particular union, if the decayed members are again joined into the constitution of the animal. For the resurrection of the same man necessarily involves in it the resurrection of the same body that was dead and decayed, and it is impossible to conceive the natural junction of the same parts and the reformation of the same man without the resurrection. Again, if understanding and reason were given man not only for the contemplation of sensible corporeal objects, but also of spiritual natures, and those glorious attributes of the Creator, his goodness, justice, wisdom, it follows necessarily, as long as those attributes, as long as the cause remains, so long will the effect, the powers of admiring and contemplating these, remain. But it is impossible they should remain unless that nature, which was the proper vehicle of these properties, continue. But the accountable and rational creature is man, not a soul subsisting by itself. Man, therefore, composed of body and soul, must exist forever, but this is impossible if there be no resurrection of the dead, for if there be no resurrection of the dead, the nature of men as men cannot exist. But if the natural man remain not, in vain hath the soul been made obnoxious to the necessities and passions of the body, and the body has in vain borne the restraint of the soul in pursuit of its own pleasures, yielding to the government of the soul, and led like a horse by the rein. In vain were invention, understanding, the observation of justice, and the practice of all virtue given to man. In vain the institution and promulgation of the laws. To conclude all, in vain was all that has been done, great and beautiful by man, nay, the very creation and nature of man was altogether vain. But if all the works of God everywhere, if all his gifts and graces are free from a charge of uselessness, then must the body be of the same lasting duration as the soul, according to its own peculiar nature. Let it not here seem harsh that life, which is interrupted by death and decay, is styled duration, for the word duration admits of various significations. There is more than one manner of duration, as there is also more than one nature in the things themselves. For if each of the things hath its duration according to its own nature, such a sameness of duration as beings incorruptible and immortal enjoy is not to be expected in things of a lower rank, nor in the case of men is it right to seek that even state of existence that never changes, seeing that the ones, being immortal from the beginning, and continuing without end only by the design of the Creator, but that man has an invariableness of duration with respect to his soul, but with regard to his body, doth by changing gain his immortality. This is the idea of the resurrection, on which, having our eyes fixed, we bear contentedly the dissolution of the body as the natural consequence of an indigent and corruptible life, and hope for a glorious and never-ending duration hereafter. Thus we neither liken our death to that of brutes, nor do we vainly equal it with the unchangeable duration of beings naturally immortal, lest by doing so we should unwittingly liken the nature and life of man to subjects wholly out of comparison. Nor let us yet think it strange that man's duration seems to be variable, nor let anyone deny the resurrection because the separation of soul and body and entire dissolution of the parts of the body break the continuity of existence. For neither do we refuse to term it life when we sleep, and are in a state of insensibility, the faculties of the mind, the senses of the body, not exerting themselves. Inasmuch as men have periodical times of sleeping, and somehow or other again rise to life, for which reason is it, I think, that some call sleep the brother of death, not as if by expression there is declared any natural generation, as if they both were derived from the same ancestors or family, but inasmuch as many of the same things are common both to the dead and sleeping, both are in a state of insensibility, ignorant of all who are present, and of all transactions about them, nay, generally not so much as having a consciousness of being or of their own existence. If then we call this human life a continued life, which is so full of breaks from our very birth to our graves, so should we neither scruple to recognize the life which lies beyond our dissolution, and which introduces with it the resurrection, though it seems interrupted by the separation of soul and body. For the nature of man, from the first, and by the first institution of the Creator, was made subject to variation, having an unequal life and duration, interrupted by sleep and death and variations from age, where all things appear in such a constant flux that when they first show themselves, others, seen but obscurely, press forward upon them. Who could believe unless convinced by experience that there could be such powers in the simple and similar seed, that such diversities of form and bulk, bones, nerves, gristle, muscles, flesh, bowels, and other parts of the body should be stored up? Should only want an evolution and a distension with other matter to unfold themselves in such beauty and magnificence? And yet nothing of this appears to the eye in the moist seed. Nor do abundance of things appear in infants which show themselves in youth, nor in youth which are manifest in manhood, nor in manhood which discover themselves in old age. But indeed of the aforesaid, some not at all, and others obscurely show the physical sequence and changes which arise in man's nature, yet all who are not blinded by vice or indolence in judging about these things, know that the sowing of the seed is the first thing to be done, and when this has expanded itself into members and parts, and the embryo has come to light, youth bestows on it stature, after which comes manhood. Then follows a declension, till, in extreme old age, the body sinks and is dissolved. As then in this process the seed discovers no likeness of a man at first, nor the life shows any signs of death, when all the parts shall be dissolved again into their first principles, but the connection of natural events furnishes the proof, and forces us to confess the reality of what showed no such appearance. so much more does reason, tracing the truth from physical consequences, establish the resurrection, and is safer and stronger than experience in confirming the truth. Of the reasons proposed for our consideration and proving the resurrection, all are of the same kind, as springing from the same principle, which is the origin of the first men by creation, but some of them are confirmed by the same first principle from which they sprang, and others, following the nature and life of men, derive their force from the providence of God on our behalf. For the cause of man's being, joined to the nature of man, derives its force from creation, but the question of his justice, according to which God judges those men who have lived well or ill, depends on the purpose of their being. These last spring from thence, but hang rather on providence. Having therefore now dispatched all the arguments of the first rank, I proceed to prove the same by the arguments of the second order, such as are drawn from the necessity of rewards and punishments, which must be distributed according to the deserts or demerits of men at the end of man's life. But of these the first must come first. I therefore begin with showing the reason of a future judgment, adding only thus much to the consideration of the principle and the order which suits the subject, that those who believe the existence of a God and his creation of man must also grant that all things are governed and ordered by his wisdom and justice, if at least they will abide by their own allowed premises, and entertaining such opinions about them, they must hold that all things on earth and in heaven are under the management and providence of God, that nothing secret or visible, great or little, is destitute of his regard, for all created nature needs his providential care, and particularly every being is more immediately dependent on him for such things as he was naturally formed and designed for. I shall not here enter into a philosophical dispute concerning the necessaries of every creature, nor make any pompous display of them, for I do not think it an object of ambition to set down or distinguish or enumerate what is suitable to each nature. Man, about whom we now discourse, is unquestionably, as subject to hunger, necessitous of food. As mortal, he wants a succession of children, and as rational, liable to a judgment to come. Again, as man stands in need of food and descendants, the former to sustain life, the latter to perpetuate his kind, so is he also accountable for the same reason of food and of succession. It follows necessarily that, as food and succession are brought together, to the same also should be brought the judgment. I mean by to the same, the man consisting of soul and body, who is the person to be rewarded or punished for his good or evil actions. If by a righteous sentence the punishment is laid on the true actor, and neither the soul separately can be punished for sins committed in conjunction with the body, since the soul, separate and distinct from the body, could not be affected with sensual pleasures, food or luxury, and the like, nor can the body be properly punished alone, as being, when considered alone, incapable of law or justice, but man, composed of these two united, is proper to receive the sentence for such actions. But this due recompense for his actions he receives not in this life. The strict rule of retribution is not observed here. How many does experience point out to us who have lived in infidelity and wickedness all their days, without receiving any stroke of correction for such an impious life? And, on the contrary, how many who have lived a life adorned with every virtue, have been always in adversity, malice, and detraction, bodily pains, and all kinds of misery? Neither can rewards and punishments be properly adjusted after death without the existence of the body, for when the soul is separated from the body, there is not the whole compound man, the body being dissolved, and all its parts scattered to the elements out of which it was taken, and no longer retaining the same shape, or form, or consciousness of the past. It is evident that, in the Apostle's phrase, this corruptible and decayed body must put on incorruption, that the dead, being brought to life again by the resurrection, and the severed or wholly decayed parts again joined, may each receive the recompense of things done in their body, whether they be good or whether they be evil. With such as allow of a providence and admit the same premises as we do, and then somehow or other fall from such just principles, the foregoing arguments and many more might be used, if the reasoning, here delivered closely and cursorily, be a little expanded. But with such persons as call in question first principles, a different method must be first used, and we must fall in with their doubts and propose such queries as these to them: whether the life and all the existence of man once for all is wholly neglected, and a dark cloud spread over the earth, covering in ignorance and oblivion men themselves and all their actions; or whether it is not the safer opinion that the Creator of all things, howsoever existing or arising, overlooks them, and is judge both of men's deeds and thoughts. For if no cognizance is taken of men's actions, they are upon a level with the brutes. Nay, many of them are much more miserable, as restraining their passions and confining themselves to the practice of justice, piety, and the other virtues. Then the life of cattle and brutes is best. Virtue is stupidity, the threat of a future judgment, highly ridiculous. Sensual pleasure must be man's chief good, the one common doctrine for all, and one law, namely, the known maxim of that profligate and luxurious crew, "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." For according to them the end of such a life is not a state of happiness or misery, but of utter insensibility. But if the sovereign Creator of mankind takes any notice of his own creatures, or makes any difference between those who have lived well or ill, it must be either in the present life, whilst they are still alive, living in virtue or in vice, or after death, when they are separate and under decay. But just judgment cannot possibly be found in either of these ways, for neither are the good rewarded nor the evil punished in this life. For I here omit to use another argument, that from the very nature of man and present constitution of things, it is impossible that he should have any punishment inflicted adequate to the greater number or the heaviest of his crimes. Suppose a robber, a prince or tyrant should accumulate murders on murders, how can his single life pay for so many? We may give an instance further of one that has lived in an utter contempt of God, has taken up wrong and blasphemous notions of him, has despised all laws, divine and human, has insulted both boys and women, has unjustly destroyed cities, involving houses and inhabitants in one common flame, ravaged the land, exterminated nations and peoples, or even a whole race. How can such an one, in his mortal body, satisfy for such an immense villainy? Death claims his due before he is punished, perhaps before his nature has sufficed to pay the debt of even one of his villainies. Justice, therefore, cannot exert itself in full force here in this mortal life, nor yet can it after death. For either death is an entire annihilation, and the soul decays and perishes together with the body, or the soul remains indissoluble, incorruptible, and imperishable, whilst the body decays and perishes, no longer preserving a memory of former actions or perception of the passions it before felt. For if the life of man is utterly destroyed, no examination can be made into the actions of men that are not alive, nor judgment of those who have lived piously or wickedly. The evils of a lawless life will follow thick upon one another, with the whole swarm of untoward consequences, and even the grand impiety of denying the existence of a God. But if the body were dissolved into its elementary principles, and the soul remained incorruptible, not even thus can judgment be passed upon it, because the rule of justice could not be applied. For it is impious to think God should judge, and not justly, but no just judgment can be made where the party that has done the justice or the injustice is not forthcoming. For it was the man, and not the soul separately, which was the author of all such actions as then come under cognizance. In a word, this view of the matter will in no respect secure justice. For both in the reward given to good deeds, the body will clearly be ill-treated in participating with the soul in the toils of its good deeds, but by being deprived of its share of the honour and reward of good actions, and in many cases from the being pardoned for some of its misdeeds through the necessities and wants of the body, and yet the body being unrewarded for the good deeds to which it supplied its labour during life. And on the other hand, were all sins punished in the soul, that would be unjust, since she alone would then bear the punishment of crimes committed through the disorder of the body, which seduced her to peculiar pleasures and gratifications, at one time by persuasion and deceit, at other times overcome by some more powerful temptation, and at other times willingly yielding to the body's desires in compliance to the weakness of her partner. How then can the soul be justly punished for such crimes as she could not possibly, by reason of her nature, be guilty of in desire, bias, or impulse, if separate and not joined to the body, such as luxury, violence, covetousness, and injustice, and the crimes that grow out of them? For if most sins proceed from men's not duly governing their troublesome passions, and they are provoked by the wants and necessities of the body, and the care and attention which it requires, for the possession of riches, and still more their use, are for the sake of the body, as well as marriage and all the transactions of life, in which and about which we consider what is vicious and what is not, how can it be just for the soul to suffer singly for such affections as were properly inherent in the body, and the soul hath only such a share in, as her union with the body doth necessarily oblige her to. Shall lusts, pleasures, fears, sorrow, and all criminal excess proceed from the body, and yet the soul only, which neither wanted, nor desired, nor feared, nor suffered anything of that kind, such as man is born to suffer, bear the whole punishment due to such crimes? But if we will, and perhaps with more propriety of speech, call them not the passions of the soul or body separately, but of man, since his life is made of the union of them both, yet cannot these offences be charged on the soul when we plainly consider its proper nature? For if the soul wanted no nutriment, she could not desire such things as were perfectly useless to her nature, and as not desiring, she would not be eager to take from others any of such things as she was naturally incapable of enjoying, nor would she be grieved for want of riches and possessions, as being things foreign to her. But if also she is superior to decay, she is incapable of fearing anything that might destroy her, for she fears neither famine, nor disease, nor mutilation, nor deformity, nor fire, nor sword, since none of these could either hurt or disturb her, since no body or bodily power can in any ways affect her spiritual nature. But as it is absurd to impute affections, such as the above-mentioned, peculiarly to the soul, so is it strangely unjust and unworthy God's judgment to assign the crimes arising from these, and the punishments due to them, to the soul alone. But, in addition to what we have said, is it not absurd that virtue and vice cannot be conceived as actions of a separate soul? For we know virtues are the properties of men, as also their opposite vices, and cannot be conceived inherent in the soul, separate and distinct from the body, but that the rewards and punishments of good actions should be given the soul alone. How can fortitude or courage be conceived as properties of the soul alone, which, upon account of its nature, can apprehend nothing terrible from death, wounds, maiming, punishment, ill treatment, or the pains consequent upon these, or suffering from those pains? How can continence and temperance be imputed to the soul, which is incapable of desiring luxurious delicacies, sensual or other pleasures and gratifications, nor is excited by any internal or external object to provoke or excite it? How can prudence be imagined to be in the soul, since nothing to be done or left undone, to be sought or to be avoided, is left to her only, but rather no motion at all is found in her, or physical impulse to anything practical? In what sense can souls be said to exercise justice to each other, or to their kind, or to any other kind, since they have not the things or means whereby to exercise such actions as may be called just or equitable, excepting only a power of paying an honour due to God, nor have any impulse to enjoy their own riches, nor to abstain from those of others? Enjoyment, according to nature, and abstinence are only properly imputed to such natures as are capable of making use of such objects, but since the soul cannot in any way want or enjoy such things, neither can she therefore be said to practice any such quality as that of attending only to her own interests. Indeed, this also is the most absurd of all, that a law should be promulgated and given to man, and the punishments and rewards of disobedience or obedience to this law be given to souls alone. For if man, and not a distinct soul, received this law, the first, therefore, and not the latter, ought to bear the punishment of disobedience. Since God did not command souls, but men, to abstain from such unlawful actions as adultery, murder, theft, rapine, disobedience to parents, and in general from all unjust, unlawful coveting the possessions of others. For the precept, "Honour thy father and thy mother," is not suitable to souls. Such names belong not to them, for souls beget not souls, so as to claim the appellation of father and mother, but man doth man. Nor can "thou shalt not commit adultery" without absurdity be spoken to or understood of souls, since in them there is no difference of male and female, nor adaptation or desire of coition. Since such a desire is impossible to souls, the thing is impossible, and where this is wholly so, not even a lawful union as marriage is possible, and in consequence lawless desire of other married women is impossible also, which is adultery. Nor is the precept against stealing or coveting the goods of others applicable to souls, for they have no need of such things, and they only, who want them for the supplying of their necessities, steal from others, or rob, such as gold, silver, cattle, or something proper for food or raiment. But an immortal nature regards not these things, which indigent creatures desire only because they want. A more complete discussion of these things may be left to those who require further explanation on the point, or would more effectually combat with our adversaries. The foregoing discourse seems to me to have sufficiently established the doctrine of a resurrection. It would be unseasonable to delay longer on these topics, for it was not here my intent to say all that so large a subject as the resurrection would furnish, but briefly and in a close demonstrative method to prove the truth of the doctrine and to adapt the sources of argument which lead in that direction to the capacity of my hearers. As I have then sufficiently discoursed on the foregoing arguments, it remains only that something should be said of the inference to be drawn from this conclusion. This is a plain consequence of what has been said, and only wants here so far to be mentioned and dwelt upon, lest it might seem through neglect passed over, and the discourse not complete and uniform. For these and the like reasons, thus much shall be said on this head, that all the works of nature or art are formed to some peculiar end and design, as the common experience of all men and the evidence of their eyes clearly attest. The several orders of men, farmers, and physicians are appointed to different ends, and again plants which grow from the earth have an end different from animals who feed upon it, and who propagate their own species. Since this is fact, and that all physical and technical powers and the practice of them have and pursue such peculiar purposes as they were appointed for, it follows that man too must have an end peculiar to himself and different from that of the generality of animals, proportionally as his nature is peculiar and distinct from theirs. For it is preposterous to put the rational nature of man, who works according to an implanted law and reason, and who enjoys a life of prudence and justice, upon a level with irrational brutes. A state of insensibility cannot be the end for which man was designed, for beings altogether without sense have that. Nor can voluptuousness and a number of pleasures be the end for which man was appointed, or else the life of brutes is more excellent than that of man, and a life of virtue and imperfection. For I think such sensuality must be the chief end of beasts and cattle only, and not of man who has an immortal soul and rational discrimination. Nor can the happiness of the soul, separate from the body, be the end of man, for we were not inquiring about the life or purpose of each of those two parts of which man is composed, but of the compound of the two. For every man who enjoys this life is so compounded, therefore the end or result of that life must be in accordance. If then the end of man, as consisting of soul and body, is demanded, and it is plain from the reasons repeatedly laid down above that no proper end can be found during his living here, nor yet in a state of the soul's separation from the body, because while the latter is dissolved and its parts scattered through the whole mass of matter, such a man does not even exist, though the soul be allowed a distinct existence by itself, it is absolutely necessary that the same compound being be again restored to life, the same man again raised, that the proper end and purpose of the men may appear, and consequently the very same dead bodies, however their parts be dispersed, must again be raised, and the same human beings be again put together. Since the law of nature does not lay down the end in general terms, nor as applicable to any men whatsoever, but of those very men who lived in the former life, and it is impossible the same men should be raised if the same bodies are not restored to the souls, and the soul cannot have the same body in any other way than by the resurrection. When this comes to pass, then will man have the end suitable to, and for which his nature was framed. And we may presume to say that the end of a virtuous life and a rational nature is to be, through all eternity, conversant with, and employed uninterruptedly about such objects as are agreeable to a spiritual nature, the contemplation of the great Being, and enjoyment of such pleasures and happiness as he hath promised to give for all eternity, though the generality of mankind are far from considering this end, from being deeply and strongly pre-engaged in the affairs of this life, but the multitude of them that fail of it does not at all disprove the common end to which they were appointed, seeing that the inquiry about these things is incumbent upon every individual, and that reward or punishment will be distributed to every one according as they have lived well or ill. End of Resurrection of the Dead by Athanasius of Athens. A treatise made by Athanasius the Great, wherein is set forth how and in what manner ye may use the Psalms, by Athanasius of Alexandria. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A treatise made by Athanasius the Great, wherein is set forth how and in what manner ye may use the Psalms according to the effect of the mind, of gladness or sorrow, accordingly which Psalms ye shall use for prayer, which for thanksgiving, which for rehearsal of God's wonderful acts, to the praise of his name. Ye also may see in them how God hath holpen his chosen people from time to time, and never forsook them. The whole Scripture universally is, as it were, a divine mistress, teaching both virtue and true faith, but the book of the Psalms hath over and besides that, in a manner, an express image of the state and condition of souls. For as he which goeth to a king composeth first his behaviour, and setteth in order his words, lest he should be counted rustical and rude, so this divine book, first by choice of all motions, wherewith the soul is affected, warneth, then frameth and instructeth by diverse forms of speaking, all such as covet virtue, and desire to know the life of the Saviour. It is easy, therefore, for every man to find out in the Psalms the motion and state of his own soul, and by that means his own figure and proper erudition. Moreover, with what words he may please God, and with what words he may correct himself, and give God thanks, lest if he speak that thing which is not lawful, he fall into impiety. For not alone of deeds, but also of every word must we give account before the judge. Wherefore, if thou wilt pronounce any man happy, thou hast how and wherefore and whom thou mayest call happy in the Psalms, as you may see in the 1st Psalm, 32nd Psalm, 41st Psalm, 112th Psalm, 119th Psalm, and the 128th Psalm. If thou wilt complain of the lying await of the Jews against the Saviour, say the 2nd Psalm. If thine acquaintance persecute thee, and many rise against thee, thou hast the 3rd Psalm. If thou, being troubled on this sort, hast called upon the Lord, and because he hath heard thee, thou wouldst give him thanks, sing the 4th Psalm and the 115th Psalm. If thou perceivest weight to be laid for thee of evil willers, and desirest that thy prayer should be heard, sing the 5th Psalm. If thou feelest the threatenings of God, and thereby perceivest thyself to be dismayed, thou mayest say the 6th Psalm and the 37th. If any consult or conspire against thee, as Ahithophel against David, and some man tell it thee, sing the 7th Psalm. When thou considerest the grace of our Saviour everywhere spread abroad, and mankind restored unto health, then, if thou wilt talk to the Lord, sing the 8th Psalm. If again thou wilt sing of the wondrous works of God, giving thanks, thou hast the 8th Psalm and the 81st Psalm. If thou wilt have thine enemy stopped and driven back, and nevertheless the creature to be saved, not trusting in thyself, but in God's Son, say the 9th Psalm. If any man will make thee afraid, thou, with trust in the Lord, shalt sing the 10th Psalm. If thou seest the pride and malice of many to abound, so that nothing which is good and godly is regarded amongst men, fly thou unto the Lord, and say the 11th Psalm. If the lyings in wait of enemies continue still, do not forget thyself, as though the Lord set naught by thee, but call upon the Lord, singing the 26th Psalm. If thou hear any man blaspheming and speaking ill against the providence, be not thou partaker of their wickedness, but flying unto God, say the 14th Psalm and the 53rd Psalm. If thou wilt know after what sort the life of a citizen of the kingdom of heaven is, sing the 15th Psalm. If thou hast need of prayer for them which withstand thee and compass thy soul about, sing the 17th Psalm and 68th, 89th and 142nd Psalm. If thou wilt know how Moses prayed, thou hast the 90th Psalm. If thou art escaped from enemies and delivered from them which persecute thee, sing the 18th Psalm. If thou marvellest at the order of things created and the grace of the divine providence, sing the 19th, 26th, 27th Psalms. If thou seest any man troubled, comfort them, and praying for them, say the words of the Psalm 20th. If thou seest thyself kept of the Lord, and that thou prosperest, rejoice and sing the 23rd Psalm. If thine enemies rush upon thee, lift up thy soul to God, and say the 25th Psalm, and thou shalt see them work wickedness in vain. If thy enemies persevere and continue, as with bloody hands seek to seduce thee or kill thee, give not judgment unto man, for all human things are suspect, but requiring God to be judge, who is the only judge, say 26th Psalm and 35th and 43rd Psalm. If thine enemies cruelly curse thee, and multiply, as it were, an host with despite, fear not no more them, though thou were nothing in danger at all, and sing the 46th Psalm. If again they be impudent which lie in wait, set thou nothing by them, but sing unto the Lord that which is in the 47th Psalm. if thou wilt know how thou ought to go unto the Lord when thou wilt give him thanks, plainly thou shalt understand and sing the 48th Psalm. Furthermore, when thou renewest thy house and soul, which receiveth the Lord, and the sensible house in which thou bodily dwellest, give thanks and say 49th and 127th Psalm. If thou see thy kinsmen and friends hate thee for the truth, leave not off thy love, neither fear such adversaries, but think what is to come, and sing the 31st Psalm. If thou seest them that be christened, delivered from the corruptible birth, marvelling at the divine bounteousness, sing the 31st Psalm. If thou wilt sing with the just men, and remembering them which live aright, sing the 33rd Psalm. If thou hast fallen amongst enemies, and wisely escaped them, and fled from their snares, and therefore wilt give thanks, call together the meek, and sing with them the 34th Psalm. If thou see the wicked strive to do mischief, think not that sin is naturally in them, as certain heretics held an opinion, but say the 36th Psalm. If thou see the evil work unrighteousness, and bear themselves lofty against the lower sort, and desirous to warn some thereof, say the 37th Psalm. If thou hast determined to take heed unto thyself, and seest the adversary lying in wait, who is most earnest against such, and wouldst arm thyself against him, sing the 39th Psalm. If thou seest many poor men and beggars, and wouldst pity them, thou mayest both try them which are now pitied already, and exhort other to do the same, saying the 41st Psalm. If thou hast a desire towards God, and hearest the enemies upbraiding, let it not dismay thee, but understanding the mortal fruit which springeth of this desire, comfort the soul with hope towards God, and with this relieve and mitigate the griefs of life, saying the 42nd Psalm. If thou wilt often call to remembrance the benefits of God which he showed to the fathers, both in the going out of Egypt and in the wilderness, and how God was good to them, but they were unthankful, thou hast the 44th Psalm, the 79th, 80th, 102nd, 106th, 107th, 114th Psalms. If fleeing unto God thou hast escaped such things as were spoken against thee, and wouldst give thanks unto God, and declare his liberality and goodness towards thee, thou hast 46th. If thou hast sinned, and being turned, fallest to repentance, and wouldst obtain mercy, thou hast the words of confession in the 51st Psalm. If thou hast suffered a false accusation before an evil king, and seest the enemy to boast, go aside and say the 52nd Psalm. If any persecute thee, and quarrel willingly to betray thee, like as the Pharisees did Christ, and strangers David, abash not thyself, but with trust in the Lord, sing the 54th Psalm and the 56th. If persecution chance, and the persecutors, unawares, enter into the cause where thou art hid, fear not, for thou hast in this straight profitable words, both for comfort and for remembrance of the things, in the 57th Psalm and 142nd. If he that lieth in wait of thee have commanded to watch and beset thy house, and thou hast escaped, give thanks unto God, and in the tables of thy soul grave the things, and say the 59th Psalm. If the enemies which trouble thee upbraid thee, and with many words backbite thee, which seem to be friends, and in the exercise of this, thy tross, thou art somewhat weak, thou mayest call upon the same also, saying the 4th Psalm. Against hypocrites, and such as brag to a man's face, say to convert them withal the 58th Psalm. If they sharply rush upon thee, and would catch thy soul, set against them thy subjection to Godward, and be of good comfort, for the fiercer they are, the more they shall be subject unto God, say thou the 62nd Psalm. If to avoid persecution thou flee into the desert, fear not, as though thou wert there alone and desolate, but having God, and in the dawning of the day rising to him, sing the 63rd Psalm. If the enemies make thee afraid, and cease not to sow deceits, and search always against thee, although they be never so many, cease not for all that, for their nets shall be like shafts of little children. If thou sing the 64th, 68th, 70th, and 71st Psalms. If thou wilt sing of God and his praise, thou hast the 65th Psalm. If thou wilt instruct any man in the mystery of the resurrection, thou hast the 80th Psalm. If thou ask mercy of God, sing the 67th Psalm. If thou seest the wicked prosper in peace, be not so offended that thou be moved, but say the 73rd Psalm. If God be angry with his people, thou hast words wherewith thou mayest comfort the same in the 74th Psalm. If thou thinkest expedient to confess thee, sing the 71st, 75th, 92nd, 105th, 106th, 108th, 111th, 118th, 136th, and 138th Psalms. If thou wilt rebuke a Gentile and an heretic, namely such a one as knoweth not God, thou mayest with intelligence sing and say that which is in the 86th Psalm. If the enemies have taken thy refuges, and thou art in great distress, although thou art troubled, yet despair not, but pray, and if when thou criest thou art heard, give thanks unto God, saying that which is in the 77th Psalm. If the enemies hold on and continue breaking in, and defiling the house of God, and killing the saints, and casting their bodies to the souls of the air, fear not their cruelty, but suffering with them that suffer affliction, say the 79th Psalm. If thou wilt sing to the Lord in solemnity, call together the servants of God, and sing the 81st and the 95th Psalm. If the enemies be gathered together everywhere, and threaten the house of the Lord, conspiring against godliness, let not the multitude and power of them dismay thee. Thou hast, as it were, an author of hope, the words which are in the 83rd Psalm. If thou see the house of God and his everlasting tabernacles, and hast a mind or affection towards them, as had the apostle, say the 84th Psalm. If rancour be stinted and captivity released, thou hast to give God thanks with all the 85th Psalm and 116th. If thou wilt know discord of the Catholic Church against divisions, and wouldst convert them, thou mayest say that which is in the 87th Psalm. If thou wilt move thyself and other to true religion, and persuade that the hope in God maketh not the soul ashamed, but rather put away all fear, praise God, saying the 91st Psalm. If thou wilt sing upon the Sabbath, thou hast the 92nd Psalm. If thou wilt give thanks upon the Sunday, thou hast in the 13th Psalm. If thou wilt give thanks in the second Sabbath, sing the 95th Psalm. If thou wilt sing upon the day of preparation, thou hast a form of praise in the 93rd Psalm, and therefore a song of rejoicing ought to be sung unto God himself. If there have been imprisonment, and the house wasted and builded again, sing that which is in the 96th Psalm. If the land have been vexed of the enemies, and whilst the Lord ruleth and reigneth it be it quiet, thou hast to sing the 97th Psalm. If thou wilt sing upon the fourth Sabbath, thou hast the 94th Psalm, for then he being betrayed began to revenge death and to triumph over the same. Therefore, when thou readest the Gospel, and seest the Jews consulting against the Lord, and the Lord himself standing boldly on our side against the devil, sing that which is in the 94th Psalm, as is next before said. If thou markest the providence of the Lord in all things, and the Lord of the same, and wouldst instruct any with the faith and obedience thereof, when thou hast persuaded them swift to acknowledge, sing the 100th Psalm. If thou knowest power in him to judge, and that God judgeth, mingling judgment with mercy, and hast a desire to attain unto it, thou hast for this purpose words in the 101st Psalm. If because of the imbecility of our nature thou art, after the manner of a physician, irk and wearied of the manifold mischiefs of life, and wouldst comfort thyself, thou hast the 102nd Psalm. Forasmuch as it is meet and convenient always and in all things to give God thanks, when thou wilt praise him, thou hast wherewith to exhort thy soul in the 103rd Psalm. If thou wilt praise God, and know how to praise him for anything, and what words he that praiseth ought to use, thou hast the 113th, 127th, 146th, 133rd, 147th, 148th, 149th, and 150th Psalms. If thou hast saith, as the Lord hath said, and believest in those things which thou speakest when thou prayest, say the 96th Psalm. If thou be captivated with strange cogitations, and hast perceived thyself to be led out of the way, and are sorry therefore, cease from henceforth, and staying there where thou perceivest thyself to sin, sit and mourn also, as the people did, saying the 137th Psalm. If thou suppose temptations to be for thy trial, give thanks after the temptation unto God, saying the 139th Psalm. If thou art again caught of thine enemies, and wouldst be delivered, say the 140th Psalm. If thou wilt make thy prayers, say the 5th Psalm, and the 141st, 142nd, 143rd, 144th Psalm. If an enemy and tyrant be risen up against the people, fear thou no more than David did Goliath, but with David believe and sing the 144th Psalm. If thou call to remembrance the goodness of God towards thee and all men, and wouldst praise God, say the 85th Psalm. If thou wilt sing unto the Lord, thou hast to say in the 96th and in the 98th Psalms. If thou, being but a mean man, peradventure, art set before thy brethren in something, puff not up thyself in pride against them, but give the praise to God, and sing the 52nd or the 151st Psalm. If thou wilt sing obedience, thou hast the 105th and the 106th, 107th, 111th, 112th, 113th, 114th, 115th, 116th, 117th, 118th, 119th, 134th, 145th, 147th, 148th, 149th, 150th Psalms. If thou wilt sing particularly of the Saviour, thou hast of him in every psalm, but especially in the 25th and the 110th Psalm. Such psalms as show his lawful generation of the Father and his presence are the 11th Psalm. Such as preach of the divine cross, and how much lying in wait he received for us, and how great things he suffered, are the 2nd Psalm and the 119th. Such as signify the lyings in wait of the Jews, and the malice and Judas Iscariot's betrayings, are the 21st Psalm and the 50th and 72nd Psalms. Such as declare his kingdom and power to judge, and his presence in the flesh, is the 16th Psalm. For declaration of his glorious resurrection in the flesh, read the 24th and the 47th Psalm. For his ascension into heaven, the 93rd Psalm, 96th, and the 98th, the 99th Psalms. Which if thou read, thou mayest espy what benefits the Lord bestowed upon us by his passion. To him be glory for ever. End of a treatise made by Athanasius the Great, wherein is set forth how and in what manner ye may use the Psalms, by Athanasius of Alexandria.